Kia ora everybody, you're listening in to Dr. Berst from Auckland, New Zealand, and you're tuning into an episode about the Avondale Pavilion project. Today, in our first episode, we're featuring a very good friend of mine and crew member, Hazza from GBAK TMD. Welcome, man.
Thanks for having me.
Let's kind of kick straight into it. There's a couple of different topics and things that I want to talk to you about. And firstly, I kind of want to start off with your background. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Ironically, I grew up in West Auckland, just down the road from this Avondale project, actually in Waterview. So I was born there and later on moved out to Te Atatū Peninsula, and that's kind of where my persona was born as Hazza.
What school did you go to?
Rutherford College.
Did you enjoy it there?
I loved it there. I don't think I enjoyed the concept of school, but I enjoyed going to school. And it was a bit of a Wild West school, but no, I certainly enjoyed it. It was fun.
And I know that you're also of Māori descent, so what iwi do you represent?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's an iwi that I represent, but Ngāpuhi is my iwi, and it's more that's where I'm from as opposed to that's what I represent.
And so how connected are you to your Māori culture?
At this point, not connected enough, but that's a journey that I'm in the process of restarting. And I say restarting because it's something that I've been through as a youth, but as I got older and became more integrated into, I guess, this universal Western culture, I sort of let a lot of that Māori heritage slip away from me. But I think it's a good thing. I think it has allowed me to sort of move on and go off and live my life and come back with better morals and values in a bid to sort of rediscover and reconnect and move forward with a better headspace.
You mentioned just then that you went to Rutherford College, and then what was the kind of journey after that? Like, did you continue studying, or what did you do?
I think it was year 12, which for the average person is like 16 to 17. I dropped out with the idea that I'd never study again. And then I was unemployed for like a year. And then I was unemployed for a year and then found myself boat building. So I kind of ended up doing this job, which was doing interiors on super yachts. I did that for 2 years, and then...
That was up in Whangarei?
Yeah, that was up in Whangarei. So I did that. I moved back up there with my dad, stayed there for 2 years, and I think it was like really good. It was kind of good to get away from the Auckland scene and sort of just go up there and chill out for a bit. And then I moved back down in 2008, I believe, after you had convinced me that I should study. And so, in 2008 I enrolled to do a certificate at Unitec, and then the following year I started my bachelor.
And what was your bachelor in? What did you major in?
I majored in graphic design, and like I didn't even really, it's not like I wanted to be a designer, I just thought it would be the easiest bachelor that I could get so I could have a certificate in something, and it's only just by chance that I actually ended up getting a job in design after uni.
So after you finished uni, what did that lead you to?
So after uni, well actually not even after uni, it was in my last year of uni I sort of found myself working with a New Zealand gourmet burger brand called Burger Fuel, and it was at the time it was sort of just doing murals and maybe a couple illustrations for them. And after a few months they kind of offered me a job as an in-house junior designer, and from there I spent 7 years working my way up to a senior designer, which involved like a lot of direction for the brand, which I think was like really awesome. And they also gave me a part of the brand which was I guess what they identify as their cultural pillars, and for Burger Fuel it was music, art and classic cars, so I looked after the art sector, which is just a cultural incentive to, I guess, grow the art and get behind artists.
7 years, that's quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it was a click of a finger, when I look back at it. But I know during those 7 years, I definitely thought that it would be the rest of my life. Like I kind of actually just assumed I was going to retire there. I think just as a creative, this idea of always wanting more and always looking for more, it was kind of, it felt like like there was a bit of a lid on that dream. So in 2018, I believe, I resigned from there and moved to the UK.
Before you left Burgerfield, what would you say is the top 2 or 3 kind of challenges that you faced during that time?
It's kind of hard to say. I definitely kind of got to see what life was like from a marketing point of view, and what it means to have a product and try and market that to someone. And that's something that I'd never really thought about before, and you kind of go through life just blindly looking at advertisements and being marketed to. So it was kind of really interesting to be behind that process, and I think that definitely helped aid my own art process and how I market myself.
And so you said after spending 7 years at Burgerfield, you decided to head over to the UK. What was the motivation for doing that?
Well, I knew I wanted to move somewhere else around the world that wasn't Australia. And I only say that wasn't Australia because like Australia is so close, and I know that sometimes like when things get a little hard, like it's easy for me to sort of just cave in. And I knew if I went to Australia and things didn't go too well, I probably would have moved home. So being part of the Commonwealth allows us to access visas in the UK. So it just made it for an easy process. So I got a 2-year visa and me and my partner moved over.
Incredibly accessible, right? You're just so close to everything.
Really accessible. And I've traveled Europe before and I always wanted to go back, but it's so hard. You kind of end up just getting a trial version of every city you go to, like if you're going to travel there. So I thought at least if we moved there, we'll be a lot closer. But unfortunately, we kind of made the decision to leave all of our travel right to the end of our visa, and at the end of our visa, insert Corona, COVID-19.
True. That would have been incredibly disruptive. But I know that also, for the most part, in your time over there, was it 2 years you said?
2 years.
Yeah. In that 2 years, you spent a majority of it in London. What was life like living there?
It was different.
In what way?
I think a lot of the way I live life in New Zealand, I've become like accustomed to the simple things. Well, not the simple things, but the things that make life easy. One of those, just having a car, living in a smaller city. And so I guess when I moved to the UK, I didn't have a car, so I had to, I guess, try and downsize my entire life into a backpack every time I hopped on the train. And just those little things kind of caught me off guard. But I don't know, I really enjoyed living in a city that was so dense. Like basically they've got double our population in London. So I think I really enjoyed that part, because I know that I can come home if I want peace, but it's hard to find chaos here because we're still such a small place.
What's the graffiti scene like over there?
I don't think it's what it used to be, but it's still like very apparent, and there's still a lot of bombing, and there's still like a lot of really driven artists who are still trying to push barriers, like in the context of graffiti, which I really enjoyed.
And what's the art scene like? Did you manage to attend many galleries and things, or was that not really?
Not as many as I thought I was going to, but I certainly found myself like figuring out my own practice while I was there, and I think I kind of turned more of my attention to what I was doing as opposed to what others were doing. And maybe I should have been more open, but it's just how it unfolded.
And what do you think is the biggest challenges that you had while living in London?
I was broke most of the time. Going from being on a salary for most of my life in New Zealand to, like, when I moved to the UK, I didn't have a job at all. Like, I basically got by on private commissions and private design jobs. And I don't even really know how I survived, to be honest, because I never really had enough money when I had money in New Zealand. So I don't really know how I kind of got through 2 years of not having consistent income, but I somehow managed to make it work. So not having a lot of money was hard, and I think that was it. I think everything else was just a learning curve, and it was like a learning curve that I needed to encounter. I know when I first moved over, I wasn't planning on getting a job, and then when I got there and I saw how expensive it was, I was looking for jobs the next day, and I don't know, man, I sent out like so many job applications. Like I've never had a CV or a portfolio in my life. I mean, I've been lucky to sort of just be invited into jobs as opposed to actually have to look for a job. So that process, like that whole process was new for me. Like my reply rate for all the jobs that I sent out was like 0%. I didn't get a single reply to any job that I applied for. And it was like pretty hard because I kind of felt a bit defeated. I think when I moved over there, I felt like I was good. When I moved over there, I felt like I was kind of going over there on a high from New Zealand. And then I kind of was just made to feel like incredibly little when I got there. But all that really did was when I got no love from any kind of jobs over there, I sort of just turned my attention back onto myself, and all the energy that I used to send out like job application forms, I just used to rebuild my website and try and market myself and just create more art.
Do you think that in your experience up until this point that it is difficult to be a full-time artist?
It's not difficult, but it weighs a lot on your mind, and I guess if you're an anxious person, it's very difficult because you kind of, all you want to surround yourself with is some kind of security. And when you remove that away from yourself, you know, of course, you're going to get like a little anxious. But I don't know, man, I just kind of like really backed myself. And there's a podcast that I actually started listening to from Tom Gerard called Bench Talk, and which he interviews like a whole bunch of artists. And
you are episode?
I'm on there somewhere. I don't know what episode I am. But like the one thing I really enjoyed about his podcast was just listening to all of these artists who were basically going through the same thing I was. You know, had job security, took a leap of faith, and everything worked out. I mean, it's not like it's going to work out in some kind of harmonious way, but everything that happens basically sort of, I felt, in my situation anyway, just funneled me into the direction that I needed to go. I find myself working way more harder now than I did when I had a job. I mean, I thought I worked pretty hard when I had a job, but it's like this interesting idea that, you know, when people work for someone, it's okay, but if I work for myself, you know, people think it's like a bit weird. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be the opposite way. Like I shouldn't have to burn myself out for someone else, and not really get the benefits from it.
I think that both of us have always been on a journey to invest in ourselves for most of our kind of creative career, at least when we were teens. And that probably brings us back to this idea of graffiti. So could you tell us a little bit about your introduction to graffiti?
I first encountered graffiti, I think when I was like 10 or something. And it was mostly seeing it, but it was a friend of mine who asked me if I wanted to go and tag. And at the time I didn't really understand the concept of it. So that's kind of where it kickstarted. And then just over the years it evolved more, and I met different people and they influenced me in different ways. And then in 2004, I think, was like kind of when I met like yourself and a bunch of others, and that's when GBAK started, and that was kind of the birth, I guess, of like my own personal graffiti movement.
What is GBAK?
It's a bunch of like-minded graffiti writers. I don't even think like because it was two crews, we never even really had like an official meaning. It was just kind of, that's all it was.
And so how many people are in GBAK?
It's hard to say. People have come and gone over the years. And I think some of the guys when we started, it's not like they've left, they just don't paint anymore. But I think there's like maybe a dozen of us still around.
And what does being in a crew mean to you?
Well, like anything, I think it's being a part of something that you share the same idea or passions around. Like for me personally, I've always been like quite ambitious. So being a part of a crew helps make those ideas like basically come to life and make a lot of kind of what I thought might be or might not be possible. You know, whatever I couldn't do by myself was surely a lot easier with two people or three or sometimes, you know, everyone. So I think it's just having the backing of people that share the same like-minded goals.
And where did we all meet?
I don't know, probably at a party or something. Oh no, actually, it was online. We all met on MSN Messenger, which I think was there was a graffiti forum called, I think, Hip Hop NZ, and I think that's where we sort of started noticing each other, other than on the streets, and then emails were exchanged and friend requests were sent, and that was kind of like the birth of it.
And geographically, we were all kind of quite spread out. We weren't all in the same kind of suburb.
Back then, it would seem like we were spread out. I mean, now I would consider it just down the road, and on the concept of having travelled around the world. I think back then what worked is because we all came from different parts of Auckland, the North Shore, Central Auckland, West Auckland, East Auckland. I don't think anyone came from South Auckland, but because we came from all these different areas, it helped us get up more because we didn't have to go there. Like there was already someone based there. You know, when that's your formula, and you use that throughout all of Auckland, like it's very easy to get up. And I guess when we were coming up in the, I don't know if you want to call it the ranks or something, there were a lot of people before us that were already doing like pretty incredible things. So what we did was we just took all those things that we thought were incredible and built them into our graffiti practice and kind of tried to do them all. Like big graffiti, good graffiti, a lot of graffiti, like all those things which I think some of these crews kind of just specialized in one thing. We tried to do all of them, and I think that's maybe where we sort of stuck out from the rest.
I guess moving from GBAK, you also are part of TMD. So do you recall which year you got put down in TMD and what that kind of story, how did that kind of come about?
So I got put in TMD in 2010, but I remember actually at school, I met a guy from TMD called PS5, and I remember being just like a little fucking mosquito to him and just, you know, trying to get as much intel as possible. And I'm pretty sure like he just gave me the mosquito flick. And I kind of remember being a bit bitter, being like, okay, fuck, I'm just going to do my own thing then. And I know that's where, you know, that was kind of like the birth of GBAK.
So you must have been, what, 16? If you were still at school? 15 something?
I think I was like 14 or 15 when I met him. Yeah, in 2010, I'd obviously been hanging out with like a lot more. I shared a studio with Askew and yourself, and was painting with like a lot more of them. I just remember getting asked at a Decepticons concert out the back.
Who asked you?
Well, Fat One gave the formal invitation, but I had kind of already caught wind of it. So it was a bit awkward being in this room knowing what was going to happen and pretending like it was the first time you're hearing this news.
That's great. And so what does being a part of two crews do for you as an artist?
It just opens up my network, because I know at the end of that year we all travelled to Miami for Primary Flight and Art Basel.
That was a really significant event for us.
Oh, it's an incredible event. I still probably bookmark it as one of the most pivotal events in my art practice, or not even art practice, I think just life practice. Yeah. And I know that because there was so many of us, and like New Zealanders just have this energy about them, so when we were rolling with that many people in Miami, like people would just gravitate towards us just because we were just this like little force. But it was like super dope because I got to meet a lot of the people that I thought I would never meet in my life. Some of them worked out to be good, and some of them I kind of probably don't think I'd ever like to meet again. But on the back of that trip, we had traveled, myself and another friend of mine, we traveled for an extra 2 months through America and Europe. And what got us through that was, you know, I guess being in TMD and being able to use that card to network with other artists who, I guess, could identify, you know, or validate who we were.
So you guys did another 2 months after that?
I probably did a month and a half actually, because it was a 2 month trip all up. I know that we already spent 2 weeks in LA and Miami, and then from there went to New York and then Europe. It was like the typical OE trip that everyone does.
What's your impressions of LA and New York?
Well, for anyone that has followed my graffiti from like the early days, you'd know that there was like a huge LA influence. So I couldn't wait to get to LA. All my favorite things were from LA, like my favorite movies, my favorite sports teams. And then when I got there, I was just like, oh, it's like a big desert city. So I was like very underwhelmed. And then I got to New York and I really enjoyed New York because it was exactly like I'd perceived it on all the movies that I'd grown up watching. But the second time I went back to LA, I think I enjoyed it a lot more. I stayed there for a month and I had a car, so I guess I could see more. But both cities I really enjoy, and I think I enjoy them for different reasons.
And so kind of looking back at your graffiti, who are some stylistic kind of influences that have helped develop your particular style?
I think the biggest influences in my style right now are some good friends of mine. And I think it's just because I spent a lot of time with them and I really enjoyed what they were doing. But and that would be Askew and another artist from Brisbane, John Kay. But I spent a lot of time with them and I kind of really watched the way that they would paint. I enjoyed the way that they were so composed when making their graffiti. So that I think is like the backbone for my style now. But my style now I think is also just a lifetime of me bending and manipulating the alphabet in general, and I've just taken all those things, what worked, what didn't work, and that's kind of what I'm left with now.
And what do you think has been the greatest challenge that you've faced in graffiti?
I mean, other than just dealing with other egotistical graffiti writers, I've always found it hard to identify with like a particular style, and that's mostly due to I'm very easily distracted. And when I see something I like, I try and incorporate that somehow. So I know that through a lifetime of my graffiti practice, I was really frustrated that I never had something consistent. And especially when I look to my close friends who have just built this this body of work over a period of time that, you can see the development in it. So that was incredibly frustrating. But all I put it down to is it just wasn't my time. Like when they were doing their thing, it just wasn't my time for me to have done my thing. And I was still in the process of learning and understanding what I liked and what I didn't like. And yeah, I guess what I'm left with now is kind of what I like and also what I'm able to harness for me to get the best out of it.
And how long have you been painting graffiti for now?
I don't know. I want to say 20 years. I mean, I'm 32 now, and I know I started at least tagging when I was 11. But the actual practice of graffiti and me enjoying graffiti, I don't know, maybe 18, 19 years. So in the grand scheme of things, when I look at the people close to me, it's not even that long.
And so kind of looking back at everything you've achieved so far with graffiti, what else is there to achieve?
The one thing I've really enjoyed in the last 3, 4, maybe even 5 years is the conversation between my graffiti and my studio practice and allowing those things to sort of bounce off each other. I don't really know what's in store at the moment, but because everything I'm doing at the moment is still quite new to me, I'm just still in exploration mode.
So you mentioned that you want to try to connect what you're doing with the kind of graph with the studio work. So what exactly are you doing with the studio work at the moment? Because some of our listeners may not be familiar with what you're doing in that space yet.
It's not like I'm trying to connect it. It's just kind of been this organic connection that started with a particular color palette. And that color palette was just, I've never done well with basically more than a certain amount of color. Basically more than 6 colors, my piece turns to shit. So what I did was I really restricted it down to a really refined color palette, which actually came from my studio practice, which is just these kind of little rose characters that have grown into their own little motifs and grown into their own family. And then I guess when I go out and paint graffiti, I've included parts of those, and then when I do my studio practice, the way I layer my graffiti has come back into my studio practice. And when I say layer, what I try and do with like my graffiti is to just try and create multiple layers that don't make sense, that on first sight make sense.
Not to put boxes on things, but I know that with some of the stuff that you do in the studio, it's letter based, and it's, you know, abstracting or exploring kind of letter forms, but then also there are some more figurative things. Could you tell us a little bit about the figurative work that you're doing?
So the figurative work just came from basically in 2016 I sort of came up with this like little rose, and then that rose developed a face, and then that became like the base for this body of work that I'm making. And then over time that it's sort of manifested and just grown into its own little sort of world. But this is kind of the part that I enjoy, because I know each character that I'm creating holds a certain value. And when I look at multi art, it's the same thing there, and, you know, using certain figures or patterns identify or symbolize as different things, and that's kind of what these characters are becoming. Each time I use them, it's to portray a certain message, and it's kind of just creating like my own language that has kind of come from a place that was very unexpected, but doesn't seem so foreign to me now that it's here.
Are you working in the studio full time?
I spend 5 days a week in my studio if I can help it. The only time I'm not here is if I'm out of the city, or if I'm kind of like, if I have a job or something that I'm being forced to do. But I try and spend basically from 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. I try and be here.
Oh, that's really dope, man. And whereabouts is your studio based?
Fortunately, it is in central Auckland, which is really good because it's just close to everything that I need. And I think after being in the UK, I've become really, not inspired, but I really enjoy being around a lot of people. And so my space is just off K Road, which is one of the most colourful roads in Auckland City. So every time I like step outside, I'm just overwhelmed with just this energy. Like it's so many awesome people on K Road.
Once again, coming back to this idea of graffiti, you obviously recently painted this pavilion project in Avondale. Now, what is your kind of knowledge of the origins of this Avondale wall?
I know that there used to be a shopping centre, a supermarket there, when I was younger, Three Guys, and the first graffiti that I remember in that space was by an Auckland graffiti writer, Tempt. That's kind of like the only flashback. And then
was that Blue and Tempt?
I think so. Over the years, I think like in the mid 2000s, like a bunch of writers sort of started spending a bit more time down there and doing pieces, and it kind of just became this little Auckland Hall of Fame. But it's also right in the middle of a place that has traditionally been known as not a safe place. And so that's always been something to watch out for. It's like, it's fine to go down there and paint, but you might also get a beat down at the same time. And I know over the years it's kind of become a little bit more positive, but that was when I first started painting down there. It was always done with this idea of like, you need to paint quick, otherwise.
Who would you get a beat down from?
I don't want to put anyone like on blast, but basically there's some local crews there, and they've always been local. From when I was like a young kid, I remember like certain gangs from Avondale, and they're still around, but it's like a bit of a younger generation now. But to their own credit, like they were just sort of maintaining a bit of turf that was, as far as they believe, belonged to them in a subcultural point of view.
And so how important is having a wall like the Avondale space for the kind of graph community to utilize?
I think it's good. So one thing, like before I moved to the UK, I used to hate painting that spot, only because I was like, I didn't want my photo to have the same background every time. And then I moved to the UK and started painting with a bunch of guys there, and every week it would be like the same spot. And then I was like, oh wow, you guys really don't mind painting the same spot, like once, twice, even 3 times a week. So that kind of changed my perspective on that Avondale spot. But then when I moved back home, I realized I don't actually need to paint there all the time, because there's hundreds of other spots that I can paint. And I actually enjoy exploring, so I try and get out of Auckland as much as possible and go find my own spots. But in saying that, to answer your question, I think it's good. It's a good place for people to go and, I don't know, practice.
One of the things that I've kind of observed or reflected on, I guess, is how a space like the Avondale Wall and places like Corbin's can be places where it's like an incubator for a lot of writers to improve and practice what they do, but also most importantly to connect people actually that come from different walks of life or different places geographically where they live. You know, like a lot of people that paint there on a regular basis probably don't live in Avondale, but they go particularly to Avondale to link up with other people and to paint some artwork there. So do you think that that's having more places like that would be a positive thing?
Yeah, because it helps you scratch an itch that at the best of times needs to be scratched. And you know, like you could be at work and you just have this sudden urge to go and do something, and you can maybe just bounce during your lunch break and quickly go and do a piece. I mean, someone was doing a piece on their lunch break when we were doing this project, you know, so I think that's kind of what's really good for it. And like you said, the idea of coming outside of Auckland and meeting other people that have also come from outside, and also having a spot that when people come from overseas that, you know, first and foremost you can be like, cool, let's go paint here and then we'll figure out somewhere to do it, but at least you'll get a piece in, because that's what most people want. They just kind of, especially when they're traveling, they just want to say that they painted in a country and that's all. They don't really care what they did or where they did it. So it's important to have places like that, and that's what I think I really enjoyed about London, was there were a bunch of places that I could just go to at any point of the day and just do something.
And I think that's also an important thing to note as well, particularly when, whether it be for locals or international people that come over, having places like this, like public spaces where people can paint, is incredibly important, because it creates, like you said, a type of hall of fame. And I think places like, say Melbourne with the laneways, you know, where people can paint freely, it's kind of mediated and not really curated, but people generally trying to paint quality work there. That has itself become a tourist attraction. You know, the city itself is leveraging a space like that to, you know, rather than looking at that space as like, oh, it's, you know, people are destroying the place or something. There's an opportunity for people to express their kind of creativity. Yeah, I definitely think that having more activity like that, and kind of consistent activity in spaces like that is really important. So what also, you know, I guess looking more on a kind of local perspective first, what do you think of the current graffiti scene?
I know I'll get shit for this, but it's not as good as it can be. But that's only from my...
As good as it can be, or is it as good as it used to be?
Well, certainly as good as it used to be. But that's only from my perspective, and things change with time. You know, I know a lot of people probably look back at what we did and probably think that's whack. So I'm only saying that from my perspective. But what I think is missing is exploration, and the current graffiti scene that I can see at the moment is on the back of, is probably, to be honest, it's on the back of an online presence, and not allowing yourself to develop your own, you know, along, whether you take something from anyone or whatever, allowing yourself to work on that over a period of time. You know, it's just like you can sort of just see what you like online and take that and build on it. But whatever you took from online, you know, that's years of practice, you know, and trying to execute that on your second piece it's never going to work. So I think that is the product of what we have here. But there has been a change, and I think there has been an emergence of some really good stuff coming out of here. But we also had, you know, the thing that everyone talks about here, like the big buff in 2012, and that took a huge hit on graffiti, mostly because it wiped out all of our history. So all these things we were inspired by, like no one else could be inspired by them. So the only place they could find inspiration, of course, is on the internet.
So I guess what you've kind of spoken to a little bit just then is also about the idea of how graffiti is such an ephemeral thing, like a temporary thing. You know, it's here one day and it's gone the next, and possibly the only thing that lives on is the photos, the videos, the stories and experiences, right? What do you think are some things that we could do to help to pass down these histories, so that the stories or our collective history can kind of continue to live on, beyond us?
Well, that's hard. I mean, like you said, graffiti is basically the only art form that has no kind of preservation. Like, it's not taken down off the wall and put away before it gets cleaned off. It's just gone and given no love in the process. But I know what you're doing and documenting is important, but nothing is as important as having something there in real life. I mean, you can learn about a certain particular painting all you want in school, and it doesn't mean something until you maybe travel to Europe and go see it in person and be overwhelmed. So yeah, I don't really know how that would work to just leave everything up, because ultimately it has to come down, and you can't just start storing, whole sides of brick walls in people's living rooms. But maybe that's just something I think we have to accept is the beauty of graffiti art, is the fact that it's temporary. I mean, it's temporary by way of buff, or it's temporary by way of capped. So either way, it's never had a long lifeline.
I guess one last thing that I kind of want to touch base on is on the pavilion project itself. So recently you've painted the pavilion. It's a pavilion which has been created by some of the students from Unitec's School of Architecture in collaboration with Panuku Development. And basically what they've created is this kind of structure which sits basically in the center of this Avondale space, and you're one of the first artists that have painted this. So could you tell us a little bit about what you've actually painted and what that is?
So my first idea when I was painting this was to maybe bring something from my studio practice in, but then I kind of thought about the context of which this pavilion is in, and it sort of didn't make sense, so I sort of took a more graffiti approach to it. So the idea was to actually cover the entire thing with like little sort of hazard pieces, but as the day went on and I realized I hadn't achieved as much as I wanted to do, it kind of had to move into phase 2. But I kind of like it like that. It's kind of just a bit more simple, I guess.
Was it a freestyled concept, or was it something that you'd already planned out?
It was an idea. I mean, I've been doing this thing for a long time, which is basically like a repetition process in which I basically just keep writing the word hazard over and over and over again until it forms some kind of pattern or just like a wallpaper. So that was the approach. And then, yeah, it just took a lot longer than I thought. And I don't know, sometimes that can be a problem, I guess, is when you try and squeeze these projects into a minimal time frame. But on the back of it sort of came something a bit more simple, which I think I'm actually kind of a bit more happy with.
And what do you think about, like every month we've got a different artist coming along to revamp this pavilion. What do you think about bringing more types of art or creative initiatives into the community? How do you think that could benefit Avondale or any other suburb around Auckland?
I think any project where art is used as the tool to bring people together, especially in communities, is like it's a win-win situation. And not everybody gets it, but what happens when you try and create something for everybody gets is you get like the worst thing ever. And so I think we certainly need like more of these projects, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other artists in this project bring to it. But it's also interesting because it just kind of speaks from that point that we were talking about before, and it's going to get gone over. Like, we're not going to preserve what I've done other than in video format and photo format.
Absolutely, man. All right, well, we might wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Hazza, for joining us in this first video of the Avondale Pavilion project. And if you would like to see more content in the future, make sure you subscribe to this channel, and check out some of the other artists that we have on board, and we'll be releasing a video each month as we go for this project, so stay tuned for more content. Thank you so much.